What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at NerdTees, Go Mooseheads Go, and welcome to week 3 of my weekly CFL pick show for the 2021 CFL season. We are back in our regular Wednesday time slot, and we are back to our regular CFL results. That's right, week 1, we put that in the rearview mirror, we took lessons learned, and we applied it into a banger of week 2. Only went 2-2 straight up because, again, the CFL is a mystical beast. But 3-1 on the totals last week, and street sweeper, baby, 4-0 against the spread, 7-1 overall on the betting picks, led us to a 9-3 week. That is 75%. That is the kind of result that we are used to around these parts. Still a couple games underwater straight up from the beginning of the year, 3-5, but we are now even money on both of the betting picks. 4-4 against the spread, 4-4 on the totals, 11-13 on the season. We're almost back to even money. Now all we got to do is go 70% from here. We can do that. We know what we're talking about. This is our game. But with the good always has to come some struggle, and I did struggle in CFL Fantasy in week 2. Had a low performance, certainly compared to the results from week 1. Only had 54.1 points in CFL Fantasy in week 2. That is a weak week, if you will. English language is great. Now in 23rd place out of the 82 people that are in that fantasy league, 141.8 points overall. My week 2 MVP is Edmonton wide receiver Shai Ross. And if you remember, Shai Ross was just kind of a toss-in because he was a very inexpensive option that I could tell was involved in the offense. Well, he paid me off in week 2. Only 3 catches for 35 yards, but the Edmonton Elks finally scored a touchdown. 3 catches, 35 yards, and a touchdown. That was 12.5 fantasy points. He was my MVP from week 2. And that is going to sweep us right into our CFL Week 3 fantasy roster, which is now in front of you, and we are loading up on Montreal Alouettes, a very exciting debut for the Alouettes in Week 2. We're going to grab Vernon Adams at quarterback, and we're going to stack him with both running back William Stanback and wide receiver BJ Cunningham. We're also going to grab that Alouettes defense because they're going up against a rookie quarterback this week, which we will talk about a little bit later. So we're definitely heavy on our Alouettes this week. We're grabbing Kadeem Carey at running back because, again, the Stampeders are rolling out a rookie quarterback this week, so they may rely even heavier on the run game. We're also going to grab Jordan Williams-Lambert because of an injury in the Saskatchewan receiving corps that I believe is going to increase the share of targets and receptions for Williams-Lambert. And we're grabbing Braverman from the Argos as well. Another really inexpensive option. I think he was the minimum cost of $2,500. But again, just like Shai Ross last week, there's somebody that is involved in the Argos pass game. We like to see that for those cheap options. I'm liking this lineup in week 3. Speaking of week 3, our 4-game slate does not include the Hamilton Tiger Cats, the 0-2 now Hamilton Tiger Cats. They get the bye, and it could not come at a better time for them, although, again, it is a little early in the season, but, man, after starting off the season 0-2, struggling the way they have, they need that bye week. We've got the Edmonton Elks traveling to BC to take on the BC Lions. We've got Montreal traveling to Calgary to take on the Stampeders, also at 0-2. We've got Winnipeg going to Toronto to take on the Argos. That's a rematch from last week. And we've got the Ottawa REDBLACKS coming off the bye, having to travel to Saskatchewan to take on Cody Fajardo and the Riders, or as he's called in our CFL community, Cody Fajita. Let's start with that Elks-Lions game, and here we've got Mike Riley at home taking on his old team. Edmonton has started off the season with back-to-back losses, really have not looked great on either side of the football. They lost that game last week to Montreal in Montreal's season debut, 30-13. Not a close football game whatsoever. The Alouettes are electric, don't get me wrong, but on paper, there's no way that game should have been that lopsided. That should have been a much closer football game James Wilder kind of led the way for the Elks offensively, touched the ball 15 times, but they were all carries. Not getting James Wilder involved in the pass game. He's too much of a weapon to not be involved in the pass game, to not at least get some targets, bring in some receptions. James Wilder should be touching the ball 20 to 25 times. He's not going to get that with carries. You have to incorporate James Wilder. I feel like I've talked about this before, like, when he played for the Argos and the Argos did the same thing, and wouldn't you know who won the pony, it didn't work out. Now, Edmonton played a disciplined game last week. They only took 2 penalties, was only worth 20 penalty yards. That is good, but they were still sloppy, even though they played disciplined. They did allow Trevor Harris to get sacked 4 times in that game against the Alouettes. Like I referenced earlier, Edmonton only has 1 offensive touchdown in 2 games this season. That is obviously not going to cut it. They've also forced 0 turnovers. That is also not going to cut it defensively. If you're a team that can't score, you've got to be opportunistic. You've got to generate turnovers because turnovers become points. If you're not forcing turnovers, you better be scoring points. And again, this is the team that I thought would be in these like 30 and 40 point shootouts every week. They got 1 offensive touchdown in 2 games. It's kind of embarrassing. Starts with the quarterback. Trevor Harris only has that 1 touchdown pass. He's got 3 interceptions on the year. But it certainly goes further than that, and it's certainly not going to help that our Monty Edwards did not participate in practice on Monday. I don't think he participated yesterday either. He's dealing with a knee injury, and that's a big weapon in that receiving corps. The Lions pulled their record to even money on the season with a 15-9 win in Calgary last week. Absolute dominance from the Lions, not just on first down, where they put up 16.3 yards per play on first down, which is massive, but a powerhouse performance out of that Lions secondary. Again, the Lions defense, the collective MVP of that football game, 6 pass knockdowns, 4 interceptions as part of 6 total turnovers generated in that game. They sacked Bo Levi Mitchell 3 times, and Bo Lacombo on his own, 6 tackles, a sack, an interception. He was all over the field. Kind of scary that he popped up on the injury reports this week. That's a situation to watch. The Lions generated 439 yards of total offense in that game, which boggles the mind that they only scored 15 points, putting up that kind of yardage, but it was a good offensive performance. You got to get a little more on the board, but overall they moved the ball very well. Such is life in the early 2021 CFL season. Teams are moving the ball, not really scoring points. It feels bad to say, but the Edmonton Elks have officially entered I have to see it territory before I can pick with them again. I don't necessarily love this game. I don't love this matchup on either side, and trust me, we will talk about it. But I can't take the Elks. I just can't do it. I have to see them do it now. And I didn't really think I'd be in this position. I really thought that the Elks were a team that I had pegged, that they'd be this glass cannon, but they haven't really, they've been a glass, sparkler. Going to take the Lions here at home. I know they're the favorites, but we're going to take them at home because Edmonton can't score. The defense, I don't think, is anything special. And anything remotely resembling last week's defensive performance from the Lions is going to be enough to get the win here. So we're going to grab BC. On the line, like I mentioned, the Lions are 4.5-point favorites at home against Edmonton. And it's gross, but I think I actually have to lay those points. It's worth pointing out, only 1 team in the CFL this year, that being the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, have actually covered as a favorite of anything greater than 1.5 points. This is on the Elks. I cannot trust them. You can't trust them offensively. You can't trust them defensively. I don't know that they know what they're doing with the football, and especially if Monty Edwards is out, I got to lay the 4.5 points on the hometown Lions. That's what I'm going to do. Total in the game set at 46.5. I hate everything about this game officially. I hate the spread. I hate the total. I don't even love the pick straight up. I'll be perfectly honest. I think I have to take the over. It just feels like something of a low number, and it's not like Edmonton can't score points. We saw a tremendous offensive output from BC last week that just didn't translate into points on the board against what can still be a good defense in Calgary. I'm going to take the over, but boy, it's going to be slim. I'm going to go Lions 27, Elks 21. Edmonton drops to 0-3 on the season. Lions cover over 46.5, but do this. Let's go to Calgary now. Alouettes and Stampeders. Montreal playing the tail end now of back-to-back road games, but picking up a super impressive win last week in Edmonton in their season debut, 30-13, which we just mentioned. Again, no rust on this machine at all. The Alouettes pound the football. They also pound Trevor Harris, and when you can do those two things, you're setting yourself up for success. Vernon Adams delivered a solid game, 62% passing, 211 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. I think he also added some stuff on the ground. And speaking of the ground, William Stanback, absolutely dominant in his season debut, 18 carries for $112 on the ground, which for the NFL fans that might be watching might not sound incredible, but again, this is the CFL. This is not a runner's league. This is a receivers league. This is a passers league. To put up $112 on 18 carries, it's something that's impressive. And the Alouettes defense. The defense generating 4 sacks, like I mentioned, also knocking down 4 passes, playing well at multiple levels. A really complete team game for the Alouettes, with the exception of one thing. I guess I should say 2 things. They took 10 penalties. It was 121 yards in penalties, including 5 for 81 on defense. That needs to be cleaned up big time, especially when you get into matchups against higher competition. Even though Calgary's 0-2, I would still, in general, consider Calgary to be higher opposition. You can't do things like that and win football games, especially when you fumble the football 3 times. You can't fumble the ball 3 times and take 10 penalties and still expect to win football games. Stampeders, holy cow, 0-2 to start the season. First time, like I mentioned, since 2009, losing that game 15-9 against BC last week, that game in Calgary. Officially going in the wrong direction here quickly, especially when you see Bo Levi Mitchell, 6-game injured list with a break in his fibula. So of course, due to that, we're going to see a quarterback that we have not seen a lot from, that being Michael O'Connor. And you have to assume that he is a downgrade from Bo Levi Mitchell. But look, they turned the ball over 6 times last week. I don't really have to say too much more than that. And through 2 weeks, Calgary's MVP is arguably their kicker. Because Rene Paredes is 6 for 6 on his extra points. 6 for 6 on his kicks, I should say. If we were worried about penalties for the Alouettes, don't worry. Calgary is the 3rd most penalized team in the CFL so far. 21 penalties through 2 games for $177 in penalty yardage. Their defense also allowing a league worst 9.9 yards per play and 8.6 yards per first down play. Can you see now why I stacked some Alouettes in fantasy this week? Of all 9 teams in the CFL in their first game, the Alouettes were the only ones that avoided that game 1 jitter. So maybe that bye week in the first week was a blessing in disguise in that sense. They're the only team to avoid those jitters. This week will determine whether or not that was a fluke, because you can say whatever you want about Calgary, you can say whatever you want about the injuries, that's still the Stampeders. Their defense, certainly their run defense, can be very good. They can win football games. I think Montreal goes into Calgary, and I think Montreal wins this football game. I'm going to take the Alouettes in Calgary to beat the Stampeders. Originally, this was an upset play. It is not anymore. It is back-to-back road games for the Alouettes, but again, the Owls team that I saw last week beats anything that Calgary has put on the field in the first 2 weeks. So originally when this line opened, Calgary were 2-point favorites in their own building, so I was very happy to take the 2 points with the Alouettes. Of course, since then, the news of the Bo Levi Mitchell long-term injury came out. The line was moving a little bit anyway. It's crossed the 0 by 5 full points. Montreal now a 3-point favorite on the road, and I'm still going to lay those 3 points. It's a relatively small price to pay. They're not asking me to buy the extra half point, so I'm going to lay the -3 on the Alouettes in Calgary. Total in the game set at 45.5 points. I can't trust the Calgary defense as a whole against a good offense, which Montreal displayed themselves to be last week, but not having Bo Levi Mitchell in this game. And again, you can say what you want about Bo after those interceptions last week. He was playing with a partially broken leg, but no Bo Levi Mitchell in this game means no over for me. I got to stick under on this number. It's a middling 40, but I'm going to stay under 45.5 points in Montreal. Calgary, I'm going to go Alouettes 27, Stamps 13. And I'll take this opportunity, as I always do, to shout out my great friends and sponsors at NerdTees. Folks, nerdtees.ca. Hit that promo code BWFinest. That is going to save you 15% at checkout. You're also going to get free shipping in Canada on any order over $100, and there's just so damn much to love with this company. So many incredible tea blends, so many incredible products, like this one that I'm drinking here, which is my lemon ginger, which I always like to throw down when I'm going to be talking to you about football for an extended period of time. Just makes the throat feel that much better. And you know what? We're coming up on cold and flu season, and this is like a warm hug when you have a cold or a flu. It's a great option. There are many great options. Nerdtees.ca, promo code BWFinest, save you 15%, get your free shipping, find yourself something to love, or find someone you love something to love. You can do it on Nerdtees.ca. Cheers, folks. Let's go to Toronto now, where we find a rematch from Week 2. That is the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, 2-0, and inarguably, I would say, the class of the league to this point, taking on the Toronto Argos. Again, this was a 20-7 victory for Winnipeg last week. Like I mentioned, I think Winnipeg are the class of the league. They are certainly the consistency kings of the CFL so far this year, and they're probably getting pretty darn close to certainly getting Darvin Adams back for this week. But even if he doesn't, they've been getting output from sources that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Wide receiver Kenny Lawler just keeps on rolling for the Bombers early in this season. 10 catches last week for 99 receiving yards, coming off of a touchdown in Week 1. He is now the most targeted wide receiver in the CFL with 20. That ties him with Brandon Banks. The Bombers' defense has also just been absolutely unstoppable this year, allowing just 1/3 the points per game of any other team that's played 2 games. They're only allowing 6.5 points per game. The next closest team, I believe it might be Saskatchewan, allowing 18.5. So the Bombers' defense is just playing on a whole other level right now. They lead the CFL in 7 different defensive categories. This is a damn good defense, and it's going to be a very tough out all season long. Argos' record drops to 1-1 with the loss last week, kind of from the penthouse to the outhouse when it comes to quarterback performances, as McLeod Bethel-Thompson gets benched in this game after putting up a big performance on Calgary in Week 1, and Nick Arbuckle comes in and does virtually nothing to steal the job from him. Now, at the very least, John White did what he could in that game to keep the Argos alive and competitive. 12 carries for $111 on the ground, including a touchdown, an incredible 30-some yard touchdown run from John White, and that really brought the Argos back into that football game. I think that made it 10-7 at that point. Like, this was a competitive football game, and it was an incredible run by John White. He is now the only running back in the CFL to have multiple runs of 20 or more yards. Keep an eye out for John White. There's the potential this week for no Charleston Hughes, who has been the person who's had the finger pointed at him for the Bo Levi Mitchell injury. But the potential of no Charleston Hughes this week for the Argos. He didn't practice yesterday or the day before, I think, not related to football. So we're kind of waiting to hear what the situation is there. It's entirely possible that he plays. I just like to have a little more certainty on that. Speaking of certainty, as far as I'm concerned, there's been no official announcement yet, but you have to go back to McLeod Bethel-Thompson. He's the only quarterback on this roster that has shown, back in Week 1 at the very least, a capacity to move the ball and put points on the board. So I think you have to go back to MBT, like the completion percentage difference. MBT's 63%, Arbuckle was 53%. QBR 97-45, like it's not close. For MBT, 2 touchdowns, no picks. For Arbuckle, no touchdowns and a pick. This is an Argos team that is solid on defense. They've only given up 20 points in each of their 2 games so far this year. That is a far cry better than what we've come to expect from the Argos over the last few years. But this QB controversy, and I'm going to put that in air quotes, comes at the absolute worst time for them. And if I don't know who the quarterback is, spoilers, I can't pick you. Obviously, we're going to be sticking with the Blue Bombers here because, again, consistency. And look, they just played last week. Winnipeg won that game by a couple of possessions, and nothing good has changed for Toronto in the 7 or 8 days between those games. So, I mean, if nothing good has changed, I don't know how you're going to see much of a different result. So we're going to take Winnipeg here to win this one. The Bombers are 7-point favorites in Toronto, which might be a tough number to lay, but I'm going to lay the 7 points on Winnipeg. Again, consistency, consistency, consistency. I'm going to say it until I'm blue in the face. The against the spread cover last week was not a layup. Like I mentioned, this was a tight game for a lot of it. So it certainly wasn't a layup, but it still got there. Total in the game set at 43.5 points. I think betting against the Winnipeg defense right now is straight up gambling. And I understand we talk a lot about spreads and odds and values and whatever, but it feels like a dice roll of a 100-sided die when you need to roll a 91. We're going to stick with the under here, and we're going to go with basically the exact same score. I'm going to give the Argos a little bit of a bump because they're playing at home. I'm going to go Winnipeg 20-10. And the last game we're going to look at here is the Ottawa REDBLACKS coming off of the bye, coming off of their win in week 1, their surprise win in week 1, taking on the Saskatchewan Roughriders in Saskatchewan. It will be really interesting to me to see if this bye came at the worst possible time for Ottawa, because does that just siphon the momentum away from a team that won a game that not a lot of people thought they were going to win? And if you look at the stat lines, I think you have to be surprised that Ottawa won that game. Absolutely anemic offensive performance. 94 net yards of offense. 94 net yards. They possessed the ball for 24 minutes of a 60-minute game. But they won because they got bailed out by their defense. 3 sacks of the quarterback on Trevor Harris. 3 interceptions off of Trevor Harris, including the game-winning, game-clinching pick 6 late in the game coming from Abdul Kana, who may not play in this game. This Ottawa team to me is very reminiscent of that 2019 offense that only put up 17.3 points per game. Clearly, I think they have a better defense than they had 2 years ago. But again, if you don't have Abdul Kana really won that game for them last week. If he doesn't play, that's a bit of a morale hit as well. Saski 2-0 to start the season, obviously winners of 2 straight, beating Hamilton 30-8 in Saskatchewan, so they get to stay home for this one. Shaq Evans at the receiver position going to the 6-game injured list as well, so that is definitely a hit for this offense, but the offense moved the ball incredibly well against Hamilton last week, and the defense was stifling on all levels. The pass rush, the middle, and the secondary, they were just incredible in that game. Cody Fajita, very, very solid in that game as well. 68%, 222 yards for 2 touchdowns and no picks. Also added 66 yards and a touchdown on 7 carries from the quarterback position. He definitely put up the numbers. William Powell, 89 yards on 18 carries. And the defense allowing just 201 total yards to Hamilton, which I think is an accomplishment in and of itself, and generated 6 turnovers in that game. An incredible performance top to bottom from them. There were 28 penalties, however, in that game, that Saskatchewan-Hamilton game from last week. 28 penalties. Saskatchewan took 20 of them. No, you can't win with that. It's shocking that Hamilton did not do better in that game when the team on the other side took 20 penalties. 20! Inexcusable penalty numbers aside, I simply can't trust the REDBLACKS offense because I don't think anything has changed. So I can't trust them, especially in a game against the CFL's highest scoring offense and a pretty darn strong defense at that. So we're definitely going to go with Saskatchewan here, who are massive favorites in this game. On the line, Saskatchewan 11.5-point favorites at home against Ottawa. This is a full 10 points higher than Saskatchewan's spread last week. This is me having an existential crisis, by the way. Ottawa plus 11.5. I can't lay that many points right now. Not in context of the fact that underdogs are hitting at 75% start the year. It's a double-digit spread, which I don't like at the best of times. Just can't lay that many points. This is the second one of these this week, but Ottawa plus 11.5, got to do it. That just feels gross. Anyway, 46.5 is the total set in this game. I'll believe that Ottawa can score 20 plus points when I see it. I don't think I see it this week, but I also don't feel like Saskatchewan runs up the score, especially where they don't have, like, again, one of their top receiving options in Shaq Evans. Yes, they've still got Kyron Moore. Yes, they've still got William Powell. They've still got offensive weapons. Don't get me wrong. But when you don't have one of your bigger ones, I just don't think they run the score up here. I'm going to go Saskatchewan 24, Ottawa 16. So it's still within that 8 points. I think this is still a tight, competitive, entertaining football game, but I'm going to take the under, and I'm going to take the points. There you go, folks. Those are my picks for Week 3 in the 2021 CFL season. We'll go over them here with you one more time. I've got the BC Lions beating Edmonton in BC. I'm going to lay the 4.5 points on the Lions in the only over of the week that goes over 46.5 points. I like the Montreal Alouettes to go into Calgary and beat the Stampeders. Montreal wins. I got Montreal covering -3 against the spread in a game that stays under 45.5 points. I got the Winnipeg Blue Bombers going to Toronto and beating the Toronto Argos for a second straight week. I'm going to lay the 7 points on the favored Blue Bombers in a game that stays under 43.5. And I've got the Saskatchewan Roughriders at home beating the Ottawa REDBLACKS. I'm going to take the points with Ottawa at plus 11.5 in a game that stays under 46.5 points. Now, for the last time this season, because again, I'm going to be giving you a 9-unit futures card on my Twitter account after the games this week. For the last time this season, I'm going to be updating you on some of the futures lines that are available via Sports Interaction. Again, they don't sponsor me. I just like shouting them out because they've had lines pretty darn consistently. The Grey Cup odds for 2021 have gone under a seismic shift from last week. No longer are the Hamilton Ticats the favorites to win the Grey Cup. They drop all the way down to 3rd in the futures rankings. Winnipeg jumping up 141 points on the odds, now at plus 322, and they are now the odds-on favorite, but followed very closely by Saskatchewan at plus 334. They increased 106 points in the odds. Hamilton dropping 60 points to plus 426. So their odds just got quite a lot better if you really believe in the Hamilton Ticats. Montreal, a massive 353-point swing on their odds, now plus 647 to win the Grey Cup. BC, another massive swing, 400 points from week 2 to now at plus 800. Also had a decent amount of movement when it comes to both the CFL Most Outstanding Player and CFL Most Outstanding Canadian. Cody Fajardo now all alone, basically on top of the odds for Most Outstanding Player at plus 350. He was plus 300 last week. Mike Riley now new on the top 3 board at plus 400. Brandon Banks, who was plus 400, I believe, last week, is now plus 550. Of course, all bets have action here. William Stanback and Vernon Adams are both on the board a little further down, both at plus 800. And Henoch Muamba is plus 850, when just last week, I think he was somewhere in the 4s. Speaking of Henoch Muamba, he leads the way for Most Outstanding Canadian futures odds at plus 200. He was plus 175 last week. Andrew Harris, who we still have not seen play yet this year, at plus 250. And Kwaku Boateng, I believe I called him Kwaku last week, Kwaku Boateng, and I was corrected on that actually in the comment section by somebody in his family. I think it was either an uncle, I believe it was, who corrected me on the proper pronunciation of the name, so I appreciate that. I hope I got it right this time. Correct me again if I'm still a little bit off in the pronunciation. But Kwaku Boateng, plus 347 now, a huge swing for him because I believe he was plus 800 in the odds for Most Outstanding Canadian last week. There you have it, folks. Week 3 episode is now in the books early on this Wednesday morning. Enjoy the games in Week 3. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at NerdTees at nerdtees.ca with the promo code BWFinest, just in case you've forgotten. Enjoy the games, as I mentioned, in Week 3. Keep an eye on my Twitter account. You're going to have that 9-unit futures card is going to be on my Twitter account after the games in Week 3. And we'll see you again for Week 4. We're chugging along in this season. At least it's here.